All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our franchise sales and marketing trends webinar series and podcast episode. As we have folks loading into the session as we're going live here today. And mind you, we're going live on a Tuesday, which is a little off from our normal go live date. We very often run these, or I should say most often on Fridays, but given summer schedules and a few other conflicts, we've had to make some adjustments, but we wanted to make sure we're able to get our review for our July franchise sales and marketing trends session and start talking through some of these highlights and pieces of information that I think are relevant and helpful as you start thinking about franchise sales. If you're new to the session and to the podcast here and to our episode, please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast. It's called Franchise Your Business, or to our YouTube channel at Big Sky Franchise Team on YouTube. Again, that's Big Sky Franchise Team. And I should say, as well as subscribe to our second podcast, our other podcast called Multiply Your Success. We are 200 plus episodes in, and this week's a great episode with a longtime franchise friend who we talk about her new book that came out and share some of the details on that. So then lastly, my name, I say lastly, and I should introduce myself to you. My name is Tom Dufour. I'm the founder of Big Sky Franchise Team, a company that works with and helps entrepreneurs franchise their business and existing franchisors to grow their systems. And so with that, I'd love to go ahead and jump into our data. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so we can go ahead and get that live. So the first chart, how we do this is I'd like to start from a macro standpoint, try to start from more macro level, and then start drilling down to more industry specific statistics, small business, and franchise. Excuse me. So the first one I always like to start with is the Institute for Supply Management report on business. They have 3 different reports, and you can see here at the ismworld.org, you can see that they have manufacturing purchasing managers index, services purchasing manager index, and the hospital purchasing managers index. So we're going to start first with the manufacturing PMI. So it says here for what happened in June, it says that the U.S. manufacturing sector contracted for the 3rd consecutive month in June as the manufacturing PMI registered 48.5%, down 0.2 percentage point compared to May's reading of 48.7%. After breaking a 16-month streak of contraction by expanding in March, the manufacturing sector has contracted the last 3 months and at a faster rate in June. None of the 5 sub-indexes that directly factor into the manufacturing PMI were in the expansion territory, down from 2 in May. So what does this mean? Well, as I've shared on other sessions, that the manufacturing PMI typically manufacturing purchases tends to be a leading indicator in terms of where we're headed. And so you can see that we're under the manufacturing break-even line. We're above the overall economy break-even line at 42.5%. But the point here is that we're kind of in the spot where we're somewhere between, shrinking or declining and kind of flat and from a manufacturing side. So I think that's worth noting. So let's take a look at the second report. Well, second report here is on the services economy. And the services PMI says that in June, the services PMI registered 48.8%, a 5 percentage point decrease compared to the May reading of 53.8%. A reading above 50% indicates the services sector economy is generally expanding. Below 50% indicates it is generally contracting. A services PMI above 49% over time generally indicates an expansion of the overall economy. Therefore, the June services PMI indicates the overall economy is contracting for the first time in 17 months. So you can see here back in, it looks like December of 22, it was below that economy break-even line. And you can see here we are at 48.8% for June of 2024. And what does that mean? Well, again, to me, this indicates that the services economy as a whole is kind of about flat or break even or just kind of hanging in there, and that's the same way that the manufacturing looks as well. It's just kind of it's not terrible. Um, it's definitely not super. It's not positive, so it's kind of flat. And so some businesses and sectors and industries might see some growth, others might see some decline, but this is as a whole what we're seeing. Now, let's take a look at the hospital PMI. And it says in the second paragraph here, it says the hospital PMI registered 55.8% in June, a 2.6% point decrease from the May reading of 58.4%, indicating a 10th consecutive month of growth after a contraction in August of last year. So as we can see here at 55.8%, the hospital purchasing managers index is positive and in a growth territory. So that's a plus. What's interesting for the hospital PMI, this is their newest report. It has the most zigs and zags that are pretty big ups and downs, big swings. And so I find that interesting for the hospital PMI, but it is an indication maybe in terms of just because the healthcare space is such a large contributor to the economy today that it's worth noting what they're doing. So it is growing here, and it is pretty noticeably above that 50% marker. So to me, that means that we see the hospitals growing, services is showing as contracting, and manufacturing is contracting, but it's above the overall economy break-even line. So we're seeing, two that are saying relatively flat, depending on the industry you're in or the business specifically where you are, maybe growth, maybe not. And then we have the hospital PMI. Okay, let's take a look next at the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate for June popped up a tick to 4.1%. And this is from tradingeconomics.com for the United States unemployment rate. And it says the unemployment rate in the United States rose to 4.1% in June of 24, the highest since November of 2021, up from 4% the previous month, and surprising market expectations, which had forecasted the rate to remain unchanged. The number of unemployed individuals increased by 162,000 to 6.811 million, while employment levels increased by 116,000 to 161.199 million. Meanwhile, the labor force participation rate went up to 62.6% from 62.5%, and the unemployment population ratio increased to 60.1% from 60.2%. And their source for this data is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's what unemployment's looking like. So it's been ticking up here since March. It was at really, if we take a look at the first of the year, it was down at 3.7%. And then it's just slowly been going up in February, 3.9, March, 3.8, April, 3.9, May, 4.0, and then June, 4.1. So what does this mean? Well, as you're advising your franchisees, talking to prospective franchisees, I think it's worth noting that, unemployment rates going up, that might mean that there are more people either looking for work or available for work. So it might be a little bit easier to find staff today than it was 6 months ago or 7 months ago at the first of the year, back in January and the end of last year, where unemployment was very low. And all things considered, this is still relatively low unemployment. Next, we're going to talk about inflation. And if you can see on this chart here, inflation for June of 24, and this is from tradingeconomics.com, United States inflation, and the consumer price index for CPI dropped in June to 3%, 3.0%. So that's the lowest number it's been in a year. And it says the annual inflation rate in the U.S. fell for the third straight month to 3% in June of 24, the lowest since June of 23, compared to 3.3% in May, and below forecasts of 3.1%. It says compared to May, I skip a few sentences here, and it says compared to May, the CPI unexpectedly fell or declined 0.1%, the first fall since May of 2020, following a flat reading and compared to expectations of a 0.1% rise. So I think that is a good indication of just what we're generally looking at for inflationary area, is that we're at least seeing this starting to come back down again after in March when it had gone up. Okay, next we're going to and by the way, what does this look like for franchisees? Well, again, the inflation rate is coming down, but it's still a 3% growth over last year, which was 3.0%. I think it was the same. Let's see, it was around 3% in June of last year too. So let's see here, June of 23 was, where was that number? It was 3%. So it was the same. So again, and that was 3% up from June of 22, which was June of 2022 was the highest inflation month at 9.1% that we've had in the recent inflationary period we've been going through. So point being that it's still inflationary and it still costs more to keep your, every month you wait, it just the dollars you have are worth less. And so, if someone's going to buy a franchise, the sooner they do it, the better, just for utilizing their spend. Next report I like to look at is the surveys of consumers from the University of Michigan. And this is the index of consumer sentiment for the last 10 years. I'm going to pull up, and it shows that looks like it fell. The consumer sentiment dropped last month and fell. But you can look at this and see the overall trend since it bottomed out in 2022, about mid-2022. We can see a steady trend line here. It's pretty easy to see that while there have been some ups and downs, it's generally up as we look at that. So I look at that as a positive, and hopefully we just kind of continue to keep seeing this zigzag and just kind of trend and its way up. So I like what we're seeing here. It's starting to get back to numbers closer to where we were in 2021, and hopefully soon start seeing to where we were back in pre-COVID time. Okay, now that this is our first session of a new quarter, so we get some quarterly reports. So this report is the Small Business Index, the quarter two report that's put out by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and MetLife, and they present this quarterly report. And I'm going to scroll down to show the report. It says the Small Business Index score, and it shows for Q2 of 2024. It's the highest rating it's had since that it's showing on the chart, dating all the way back to Q3 of 2020. So we're going back 4 years. This is the highest rating we're at. 69.5 is the index score. So I look at that and I think that's a very positive thing to see that the business sentiment, small business index, is showing positive expectations and optimism right now for small business. It's always good when small business is feeling positive and doing well. That generally bodes well for the rest of the economy. The next report I like to look at is by Vistage. This is their CEO confidence report. And so just from a high level, this dates back to Q2 of 2019 is what they're showing on the report here. And it shows that in Q2 of 2024, the CEO confidence index was at 83.3, which was a decline, a small drop from Q1 of 2024, but was still up from all other reports in all of 2023. So I think that's interesting. So this is the second highest reading since, dating all the way back to let's see, since Q2 of 2022. Just seeing some positive trends here that we're continuing to just show a positive trend up. And then the next report is by Vistage and the Wall Street Journal. And this is their small business CEO confidence index that they put out. And this is calculated from responses to a set of 6 questions about the current and future state of the U.S. economy, revenue and profitability projections, and hiring and investment plans. Measured over time, the index reflects trends in the U.S. economy. So if we look at this, it shows that for Q2, for June, it was 91.0, May was 87.1, April was 90.0, March 93.1, February 93.3. So it's showing right around where it's been for most of 2024 and above all of 2022, all of 2020, all of 2023, excuse me, and all of 2022 that it shows. Well, nope, it goes back higher there. Goes all the way back to February of 2022 is where we get to the first number that was above where we are today. So positive sign here, just to show that the small business CEO confidence index. Next up is new business formations. New business formation statistics. So this was released Thursday, July 11th, and this is put out by the U.S. Census Bureau. And I really like to show this because it showcases how many new business startups are occurring across the country. So it showed that 431,246 new business applications were filed in June of 2024. It was a 1.7% increase from last month. And so I still think it's remarkable. We can see dating back to 2021. So for, 21, 22, 23, and now half the year of 2024, 3.5 years, we've been over 400,000 new business startups. And again, what does that mean? Well, to me, it means that new business startup sentiment, it is on the minds of people. It's on the minds of people of starting their own business, and they're doing it more freely. All right, let's move over to the Franchise Insights. This is franchiseinsights.com. And I like to take a look at a couple of different reports that they publish. The first one here that I want to take a look at is the Small Business Startup Sentiment Report. And this is was released July 10th of 2024 by franchiseinsights.com. And it says, startup sentiment is steady, but demographic mix shifts. Generation X and full-time workers are record shares of responders in June of 2024. So let's take a look at some of the data points here. So one thing I like to see is that we can see that, 31 and 20. So 51.1% of all respondents said that they expect to be starting their startup either next month or in the next 2 to 3 months. So that means half of the people that are likely inquiring about your franchise are looking to get started in the next 3 months, which means there should be a bit of a sense of urgency when you're talking to folks. The Federal Reserve is holding its rates steady or decreasing them moderately. And it says, this is one of the questions that the report asks. It says, which of these factors will have the biggest impact on the next 6 months of your decision in starting a business? And the number one concern for budding entrepreneurs is funding or access to credit. 2/3 of them are saying that is very important. 44% are saying the economic climate. Almost 26% are saying, or 26%, or roughly 1/4 of the people are saying political changes. So despite all of the political things that are going on right now, especially with the presidential election here in the U.S. Upcoming, political changes is still significantly less than budding entrepreneurs' concern of funding or access to credit. So if you're in the franchise sales or franchise selling space, having a solution to help with funding is going to really, really make a difference in your franchise sales efforts. Okay, let's take a look at the, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this. It says Generation X share at 63.9% of all people looking to start a business, followed by Gen Y at 18.1%. So 63.9% of buyers are Generation X folks. 13.9% are baby boomers, 18.1% are millennials, and then 4% are Gen Zs. So just to give you an idea of what those demographic trends are, at least in terms of age of the people coming through. So that is the consumer sentiment, or the new business startup sentiment index. The next report that I'd like to show is about franchise sales. And so this was a report that was put out July 17th, so just a few days ago, by Mike Alston for Franchise Insights. And the heading reads, 2 strong months of prospect contact attempt rates precede a dip in June. So the question was, prospect contact attempt rates, and it says, how many franchises attempted to contact you that you inquired about? And one answer for June is all of them. The second one is at least half. The next one is less than half. And the fourth option is none of them. So in June, 35.7% of the respondents said all of the franchisors responded back to them. Hey, good job. More than a third of the folks they reached out to are doing that. 17.9% said that at least half. So if we add those two together, we're talking, what is that? About 63, 64% are saying that, at least half of them responded, or all of them. 15.5% of the respondents said less than half of the franchise companies they reached out to responded. And then 31% of the respondents said that none of the franchisors reached out. So it's interesting. You have on the ends, it's almost split kind of a third, is that, about a third said all the franchisors responded. About a third said, at least half or less than half. So kind of around that half number. And then 31% said that none of them responded, which is or roughly that third said none of them did. So what does that mean? Well, it means that there's room for improvement for franchisors and franchise salespeople to make sure you're contacting your folks, follow up. Hopefully that's just a symptom of summer and vacation schedules, more so than just a regular pattern here. Okay. Next is a report that was released July 2nd, 2024 by Mike Alston for Franchise Insights. And it says, today's franchise development prospects desire to follow a system. So they asked franchise prospects, they self-reported their strengths, top 3 strengths reported for franchise ownership. So the strengths in order, the self-reported, about 2/3 of the respondents said a willingness to follow a proven system, which is good. That's what you need to be successful in franchising. Number 2 was grit, or persistence towards a goal despite obstacles. About half said that they have that. Number 3, about half said team leadership or experience. Almost 40% said supportive spouse or a partner. About 35% said experience in the business segment I'm pursuing. About a third said access to sufficient startup capital. And let's see, the next one was prior business ownership was 27.7%, roughly a quarter. And then other, there was just another category at 3.6%. So what does this mean? Well, what this means is that prospects coming in, most of them, roughly 2 out of 3 of them, are thinking that they've got to come in with a willingness to follow a proven system, which is great, because that means they're coming in thinking, I better be ready to follow a program or a system, which is what franchising is built around. So I think that's really, really great. The next report that I always like to go over is the top 10 business categories for franchising. Now, this is business opportunity, but boy, I've reached out to franchiseinsights.com and mentioned this to them, but I'm pretty sure that these categories got switched because this looks just like the franchise category from 9 months or so ago, maybe a year ago, um, as it just looks exactly like it. Where home services is showing 22.9%, so 22.9% of all franchise leads generated were for home services, 14.4% for business services, 13.9% for cleaning and maintenance, 10% for food and restaurants, 9.8% for senior and healthcare. Pet services were at 7.4%, retail at 4%, child related 3.4%, education 2.8%, and automotive at 2.1%. So, what does this mean? Well, it means if you're in one of these top 10 categories for franchising, if your franchise is in one of these top 10 categories, it means that it's probably going to be a little bit easier to find franchise leads through some of the online marketing efforts. If you're not in the top 10, well, that just means there might be fewer leads or it might be a little more challenging to find. So just to help keep that in perspective as you start thinking about, well, why am I not generating as many leads as I'd like to? Or maybe thinking, why am I generating so many leads? Or it's easy to generate leads. Well, you might just happen to be in one of these top 4 or 5 categories where these top 5 are really close to 10% or over 10% of responses. The final piece, the final information here I'd like to share is from the International Franchise Association's website, franchise.org. And this is from July 19th, 2024, just a few days ago. And it says, I believe that was Friday last week. And it says the IFA statement on the National Labor Relations Board dropping joint employer push, quote, a landmark win for franchise small businesses, unquote. And the article here was published by the IFA government relations team. And it says, stresses the need to remain vigilant of future NLRB threats of joint employer, urges Senate to reject the nomination of NLRB Chair Lauren McFerrin. And it says, Washington, the International Franchise Association today released the following statement after the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, withdrew its appeal of the March 2024 ruling by the 5th District Court of Texas that struck down the NLRB's joint employer rule. It says, quote, this announcement means that the latest attempt to implement joint employers finally finished and represents a landmark victory for franchise small businesses and in communities across America, unquote, said Matt Haller, the IFA president and CEO. Quote, the franchise business model is the best vehicle for American workers to generate upward mobility and create small business ownership from all walks of life. Make no mistake, while today's news means the current threat is behind us, IFA will remain vigilant against any attempts to target the franchise model or our members, unquote. So I think that this is an important part because it means that the joint employer rule that has been threatened for quite some time now, at least this current round, is over, and that the International Franchise Association is advocating and working on behalf of its franchise of the franchise community to do what it thinks is best for the franchise community. And so that is a big relief for this. This is a big relief for franchisors, recognizing that the joint employer threat has temporarily been diminished or extinguished here based off of this article. So that's our session today. I'd like to open things up for questions. And while I'm waiting to see if any come in, this is just a reminder, make sure you subscribe to our podcast, which is the Franchise Your Business podcast, as well as our Multiply Your Success podcast. I host that podcast as well. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is just Big Sky Franchise Team at YouTube when you search in the YouTube search bar. So looks like we don't have any questions coming in. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We'll be back next month with another edition of the Current Franchise Sales and Marketing Trends webinar and educational podcast. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Have a great rest of your day.